The town of Millstone existed in the kind of forgotten corner of America where time moved like honey on a cold day. Dusty roads stretched between empty fields, and the main street held maybe a dozen businesses that had seen better decades. It was a perfect place for a man who wanted to disappear. When the stranger first arrived, nobody gave him much thought. He rented a small house at the edge of town, paid his deposit in cash, and asked no questions. The landlord described him as polite but distant, the kind of tenant you barely remembered having. Every morning before sunrise, he would emerge from his house with a hood pulled tight over his head, disappearing for hours into the gray dawn. The old boxing gym on Main Street had stood there for 30 years, weathered and worn like everything else in Millstone. Inside, the floorboard creaked with age, lockers bore rust stains like battle scars, and heavy bags hung like sleeping giants, their surfaces worn smooth by countless fists. This was the domain of Jeremy Sloan, former Olympic champion and current king of his own shrinking kingdom. Jeremy ruled the gym with an iron fist wrapped in golden memories. His Olympic medal hung prominently behind the front desk, catching light like a beacon of past glory. He carried himself with the swagger of a man who had once stood atop the world, but the years had twisted that confidence into something uglier, arrogance mixed with desperation to remain relevant. The younger fighters orbited around Jeremy like planets around a dying star, drawn by his reputation but kept distant by his volatile ego. He had a way of making everyone feel smaller, less significant, as if their dreams were nothing compared to his accomplished past. The gym was his court, and he was the unforgiving king. When the hooded stranger first walked through those gym doors, the usual chatter barely paused. New faces came and went in places like this, middle-aged men chasing youth, weekend warriors playing at being fighters. Jeremy barely glanced up from berating a teenager about his footwork. The stranger signed the waiver with steady hands, his signature illegible beneath the hood's shadow. He paid for a month up front, cash again, and asked for nothing more than access to the heavy bags. No training sessions, no coaching, no small talk, just silence and space. He moved to the far corner where the oldest equipment lived, forgotten relics that newer members avoided. There, he began his ritual. Methodical hand-wrapping, each turn precise and practiced. The way he taped his wrists spoke of decades of muscle memory, movements so ingrained they had become meditation. When he first struck the heavy bag, something shifted in the gym's atmosphere. His punches weren't the wild swings of an amateur or the show-off combinations of someone trying to impress. They were surgical, each strike deliberate, controlled, devastatingly efficient. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish, just pure technique refined to its essence. The younger fighters began to notice. During their water breaks, eyes would drift toward the corner where the hooded man worked. His combinations flowed like water, each punch setting up the next in perfect sequence. Jab, jab, hook, slip, hook. The rhythm was hypnotic, the precision unnerving. "Who is that guy?" whispered Alex, a 17-year-old with dreams bigger than his hometown. "Don't know," replied Sarah, toweling sweat from her forehead. "But look at that footwork. That's not amateur hour stuff." Jeremy, across the gym, felt a subtle shift in attention like a physical force. His domain was being invaded by mystery, and mystery bred questions. Questions bred doubt, and doubt was the enemy of absolute authority. For days, Jeremy ignored the stranger, focusing instead on his paying students and regular trainees. But the presence lingered at the edge of his consciousness like an itch he couldn't scratch. The way the man moved, the precision of his technique, the almost supernatural quiet that surrounded him, it all felt familiar yet impossible to place. The hooded figure never spoke to anyone, never asked for help, never showed his face completely. He would arrive before the morning rush, work with mechanical precision for exactly 90 minutes, then disappear back into Millstone's sleepy streets. No boasting, no socializing, no acknowledgement of the growing curiosity around him. But Jeremy Sloan had built his reputation on being the biggest presence in any room, and the silent stranger was threatening that dominance without saying a word. The kingdom was vast enough for only one king, and Jeremy had no intention of sharing his throne. As the days passed, the whispers grew louder. Students began comparing the stranger's technique to professionals they'd seen on television. His defensive movements were too fluid, his offensive combinations too complex for someone just keeping in shape. This was a man who had lived in the ring, who had made violence into art. Jeremy's irritation festered like an untreated wound. Every day the hooded man returned, and every day Jeremy felt his authority slip just a little further. The time for tolerance was ending. The time for confrontation was beginning. In small towns like Millstone, legends were born from moments when ordinary days exploded into extraordinary events. Neither Jeremy nor the hooded stranger knew it yet, but such a moment was approaching fast, carrying with it the power to change everything forever. Jeremy Sloan had never been a patient man. In the ring, he was explosive, all power and precision delivered in devastating bursts. Outside the ring, he demanded immediate respect, instant recognition, total deference. The hooded stranger was testing every fiber of Jeremy's carefully constructed authority, and the former Olympic champion was reaching his breaking point. "Hey, old man," Jeremy called out one Tuesday morning, his voice cutting through the gym's ambient noise like a blade. "You know this isn't a retirement home, right? You planning to actually fight, or just dance with that bag like it owes you money?" The stranger didn't pause in his rhythm. Jab, cross, hook, slip. The heavy bag swayed gently, absorbing punishment with the resignation of an old soldier. No acknowledgement, no reaction, just continued focus on the task at hand. Jeremy's jaw tightened. In his world, silence was defiance, and defiance demanded consequences. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Grandpa. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue." Still nothing. The stranger's breathing remained steady, controlled. His movements never wavered. If anything, he seemed to disappear deeper into his own world, becoming more unreachable with each passing second. Around the gym, conversation slowed. Students exchanged glances, sensing the electricity building in the air. They knew Jeremy's moods, understood the warning signs. When his voice took on that particular edge, someone was about to get hurt, either physically or emotionally. "Careful there, old-timer," Jeremy continued, warming to his theme. "Don't want you throwing out a hip. I think the senior center's 2 blocks down, if you're looking for your speed." Sarah paused mid-jump rope, shooting worried looks between Jeremy and the hooded figure. Alex stopped hitting the speed bag entirely, his teenage sense of justice warring with his fear of Jeremy's wrath. The gym's atmosphere grew thick with tension, but the stranger remained unmoved. His routine continued with mechanical precision, as if Jeremy's taunts were nothing more than background noise. This only fueled Jeremy's frustration further. In his experience, everyone eventually cracked under pressure. Everyone had a breaking point, finding it was just a matter of applying the right leverage. Days blended into a campaign of escalating harassment. Jeremy's comments grew sharper, more personal, designed to cut deep. He questioned the man's courage, his relevance, his right to occupy space in the gym. Each taunt was met with the same maddening silence, the same unwavering focus. "You hiding under that hood because you're ashamed of what you become." Jeremy sneered one afternoon, his voice carrying across the entire gym. "Look at you, old, broken, hiding like a coward who knows his best days are ancient history." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Students stopped training entirely now, unable to focus on their own routines while witnessing this slow-motion character assassination. Some looked uncomfortable, others fascinated by the psychological warfare playing out before them. And still, the hooded man said nothing. He adjusted his gloves, checked his hand wraps, and returned to the heavy bag with the patience of a monk and the precision of a surgeon. Jeremy's frustration was transforming into something darker, a need to not just defeat this challenge to his authority, but to utterly destroy it. The gym was his world, these students his subjects, and this silent intruder was threatening the entire power structure he had spent years building. "What's black, old, and too slow to matter?" Jeremy announced one particularly busy afternoon, his voice projecting across the packed gym. The question landed like a physical blow. Students froze mid-exercise, their faces registering shock and disgust. Even Jeremy's most loyal followers looked uncomfortable, recognizing that a line had been crossed. The cruelty was no longer just personal. It had become something much uglier. For the first time since arriving at the gym, the hooded stranger stopped completely. His gloved hands dropped to his sides. The heavy bag continued swaying behind him, marking time like a funeral metronome. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face Jeremy across the gym floor. Even with his face hidden, something had changed in his posture. The resignation was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused. It was the stance of a man who had reached his own breaking point, who had decided that silence was no longer an option. Without a word, the stranger walked past Jeremy toward the exit. His movements were controlled but different now, less like a man avoiding confrontation, and more like a predator choosing when to strike. The gym's front door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like thunder. In the silence that followed, students began whispering among themselves. Phone cameras came out, grainy photos were shared, and theories flew like sparks from a fire. "I'm telling you, that's Mike Tyson," Alex insisted, showing a blurry comparison photo on his phone. "Look at the jawline, the way he moves. It has to be him." "Mike Tyson lives in Vegas," Sarah countered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Besides, why would he be here in Millstone?" "Maybe he's hiding from something," suggested another student. "Maybe he just wants to be left alone." But Jeremy felt no remorse for driving the stranger away. If anything, he felt vindicated. The mysterious challenger to his authority had been exposed as just another broken-down has-been who couldn't handle real pressure. Tomorrow, he would reassert his dominance over the gym, remind everyone who really ran things. What Jeremy didn't understand was that he hadn't won anything. He had simply lit a fuse on something much more dangerous than he could imagine. The hooded stranger hadn't left in defeat. He had left to prepare. And when he returned, everything in Millstone's quiet little boxing gym was about to change forever. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. Jeremy Sloan arrived at the gym the next morning with the swagger of a general who had won a decisive battle. The mysterious hooded stranger hadn't returned after yesterday's confrontation, and Jeremy felt the natural order had been restored. His authority was absolute once again, his dominance unchallenged. "See," he announced to the early morning students stretching near the rings. "Sometimes you just have to stand up to bullies. Some old fool thinks he can intimidate me with silence and mystery. Please, I eat wannabe legends for breakfast." But his celebration was premature. At exactly the same time as every previous morning, the front door opened. The hooded figure walked in, signed the register, and moved toward his usual corner as if nothing had happened. The only difference was the electricity that seemed to follow him across the gym floor. Jeremy felt his confidence falter for just a moment before rage replaced it. "You're back," he called out, his voice echoing off the gym walls. "I thought we settled this yesterday. Guess some people are too stupid to take a hint." The stranger began wrapping his hands with the same methodical precision as always, but something felt different. The air around him seemed charged, dangerous, like the moments before lightning strikes. Students throughout the gym sensed it too, their conversations dropping to whispers. "Hey, deaf old man, I'm talking to you," Jeremy pressed, stepping closer. This time, he was determined to get a reaction. "You think you're better than everyone here? Coming in with that hood like you're some mysterious warrior? What's the matter? Afraid someone might see those gray hairs and realize you're just another washed-up relic?" The hand-wrapping stopped. For several heartbeats, the only sound in the gym was a distant hum of fluorescent lights and the soft whisper of someone's jump rope. Then, slowly, the stranger raised his hands and pulled back his hood. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps scattered across the gym like falling dominoes. Alex dropped his water bottle, the plastic clattering against the floor. Sarah took an involuntary step backward. Even the older trainers, men who had seen everything the sport had to offer, stood frozen in disbelief. Mike Tyson stood before them, his face unmistakable despite the years. The same intense eyes, the same powerful jawline, the same aura of barely contained force that had once made him the most feared man on the planet. But there was something else there too, wisdom, patience, the kind of stillness that comes only from surviving life's deepest storms. Jeremy's sneer faltered for exactly 3 seconds before returning with venomous intensity. "Oh, wow, look at that," he said, clapping sarcastically. "Mike Tyson in my gym. What a treat." The sarcasm couldn't hide the tremor in his voice, the recognition that he had awakened something far beyond his ability to control. But Jeremy Sloan had never backed down from a fight, and his ego wouldn't let him start now. "Tell me, champ," Jeremy continued, stepping closer, "what are you really doing here?" Running from your past? Trying to relive your glory days one pathetic training session at a time? Because from where I stand, all I see is a tired old man too scared to admit he doesn't belong anymore. Mike looked at him with the calm patience of a mountain weathering a storm. No anger, no fear, just a kind of stillness that suggested he had heard every insult, faced every challenge, and survived worse than anything Jeremy could imagine. "Come on, tough guy," Jeremy pressed, his voice rising with desperation disguised as aggression. "Say something. Are you afraid of getting hurt again? Afraid of getting humiliated? You know what I think? I think you're nothing now. Just another broken-down has-been with a scary reputation and no future." Several students began moving closer, their instinct warning them that something was about to explode. The atmosphere in the gym had become suffocating, heavy with the weight of words that could never be taken back. Jeremy raised his voice to address the entire gym. "You want to show everyone you still got it? Then get in the ring. Prove it, or take your washed-up self out of my gym for good." The challenge hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone understood what was happening. A former Olympic champion was calling out arguably the greatest heavyweight boxer who had ever lived. It was like watching someone challenge a hurricane to a wind contest. Mike stood motionless for what felt like an eternity. Then, with movements as deliberate as sunrise, he removed his second glove and placed it carefully on the bench. Without a word, without expression, without any trace of emotion, he walked toward the ring. The gym erupted in whispers and gasps. Phones appeared as if summoned by magic, fingers fumbling to capture what everyone instinctively knew would be a moment that defined their lives. This wasn't just a sparring session. It was a reckoning decades in the making. Jeremy barked orders for gloves, his bravado intact but his hands betraying the slightest tremor. "You're going to regret this, old man," he snarled, pulling on his gear. "When I knock you flat, I want every kid in this place to remember who the real champion is." Mike stepped through the ropes with the fluid grace of a man returning home after a long journey. He moved to his corner and waited, hands at his sides, breathing steady and controlled. No trash talk, no intimidation tactics, no psychological games, just presence, pure and undiluted. As the impromptu bell was called, Jeremy bounced on his feet like a man possessed. His Olympic training had taught him to strike fast and hard, to overwhelm opponents with superior technique and conditioning. He was younger, fresher, still in fighting shape. But as he looked across the ring at Mike Tyson's calm, patient face, Jeremy Sloan realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had challenged not just a legend, but a force of nature. And forces of nature don't negotiate. They simply are. The storm was about to break, and there would be no shelter from what was coming. The bell's echo hadn't yet faded when Jeremy Sloan exploded into motion. Years of Olympic training propelled him forward like a missile, his combinations sharp and precise. Jab, cross, hook, each punch thrown with a speed and technique that had once earned him gold. He was fighting the fight of his life, and he knew it. But Mike Tyson wasn't there. Where Jeremy expected to find flesh and bone, he found only empty air. Mike had slipped to the left with such fluid grace that it looked almost supernatural, like watching water flow around stone. Jeremy's punches cut through nothing, his momentum carrying him past his target and into vulnerability. "Stay still, you coward," Jeremy growled, resetting his stance and launching another combination. 2 jabs aimed at Mike's head, followed by a crushing right hand to the body. Each punch thrown with bad intentions, designed to end the fight quickly and brutally. Again, Mike simply wasn't there. He moved like smoke, like shadow, like something that existed between seconds. Jeremy's fists found only air while Mike studied him with the patient attention of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. The crowd pressed closer to the ring, their whispers creating a low buzz of amazement. They weren't just watching defensive boxing, they were watching art. Mike hadn't thrown a single punch, yet he was completely in control of every second that passed. "Fight me!" Jeremy screamed, his Olympic composure cracking like ice under pressure. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the early stage of the fight. His breathing was already becoming labored, not from exertion but from the mounting frustration of hitting nothing but air. Mike's defensive mastery was more than technique. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. Every missed punch eroded Jeremy's confidence. Every slip and dodge demonstrated the vast gulf between Olympic-level boxing and the kind of ring genius that transcended all conventional measurement. Jeremy changed tactics, throwing wilder, more desperate combinations. An overhand right with knockout power behind it aimed directly at Mike's skull. But Mike stepped inside the punch like a ghost, letting it pass harmlessly over his shoulder while positioning himself for a counter that never came. "You afraid to hit me, old man?" Jeremy taunted between gasps. "Come on, Tyson. What are you waiting for? Can't pull the trigger anymore? Is that it?" The words were meant to provoke, but they only revealed Jeremy's growing desperation. He was discovering what every great fighter eventually learns, that facing true greatness exposes every flaw, every limitation, every false belief about one's own abilities. Mike's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. For the first time since entering the ring, he spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You hit like you talk, loud, fast, and without purpose." The insult landed harder than any physical blow Jeremy had ever received. His face flushed red with humiliation and rage. With a primal scream, he launched himself forward, throwing everything he had in a desperate flurry of punches designed to overwhelm through sheer volume. That's when Mike Tyson finally decided to fight back. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment Mike was defensive, passive, almost gentle in his avoidance. The next moment, he was a hurricane of controlled violence that redefined everyone's understanding of what human beings could accomplish in a boxing ring. A single step to the left, a slip that made Jeremy's haymaker look clumsy and telegraphed, then a right hook to the ribs that landed with a sound of thunder, driving the air from Jeremy's lungs and buckling his knees. Jeremy staggered but didn't fall. His Olympic training kept him upright, kept him dangerous. But the look in his eyes had changed completely. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the dawning realization that he was facing something far beyond his ability to handle. Mike didn't press his advantage. He waited, hands ready, watching Jeremy with the patience of a master craftsman admiring his work. There was no cruelty in his stillness, no sadistic pleasure in his opponent's pain. Just professional assessment, the kind that separates legends from everyone else. Jeremy charged again, this time with the desperation of a man who understood that his reputation, his identity, everything he believed about himself was crumbling with each passing second. His punches were wilder now, less controlled, but still dangerous enough to end the fight if they landed. They didn't land. Mike slipped left, ducked under a savage hook, and stepped in close enough to whisper, "You don't belong here either." Then he unleashed hell. 3 punches in less than 2 seconds. A hook to the body that doubled Jeremy over. A left uppercut that snapped his head back. A right cross that sent him flying backward like he'd been hit by a truck. Jeremy hit the mat with a sound that seemed to echo forever. His arms spread wide, his eyes blinking in dazed confusion, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for water. The gym fell into absolute silence, the kind of quiet that follows natural disasters and life-changing moments. Mike turned his back and walked to the corner, his breathing steady and controlled. No celebration, no boasting, no acknowledgement of what he had just accomplished. He sat on the stool like a man who had simply completed a routine task, neither satisfied nor disappointed by the outcome. Jeremy didn't get up immediately. When he finally struggled to his feet, helped by several concerned students, his face carried the expression of a man who had just learned something fundamental about the universe and about himself. The arrogance was gone, burned away by the brutal reality of facing genuine greatness. Mike stood and pulled his hoodie back over his head, transforming once again into the mysterious stranger who had first walked into the gym weeks ago. He began wrapping his gloves methodically, preparing to resume his normal routine as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. For the first time in years, Jeremy Sloan had absolutely nothing to say. The storm had broken. The reckoning was complete, and everything in Millstone's little boxing gym had changed forever. The only question now was what would rise from the ruins of Jeremy's shattered pride. In the days following the fight that changed everything, Millstone's boxing gym became a different place entirely. Word had spread through the town like wildfire. Mike Tyson had been training there in secret, and he had just delivered one of the most educational beatdowns in boxing history to their local Olympic champion. Jeremy Sloan didn't show up for 3 days. His absence created a strange vacuum in the gym's ecosystem, like removing a dictator and watching an entire society struggle to understand what freedom might look like. Students trained quietly, respectfully, but with an underlying excitement that couldn't be contained. Mike returned the very next morning as if nothing had changed. Same time, same routine, same methodical precision. But everything around him had transformed. The whispers followed his every movement now, not with mockery or curiosity, but with something approaching reverence. Students who had once laughed at Jeremy's taunts now watched Mike's every movement with scholarly intensity. They studied his footwork, analyzed his combinations, tried to decode the mysteries of defensive perfection they had witnessed. But they kept their distance, uncertain how to approach a living legend who seemed to prefer solitude. When Jeremy finally returned, he looked like a different man entirely. The swagger was gone, replaced by something harder to define, humility mixed with determination, pride tempered by wisdom. He carried himself like a student rather than a teacher, his eyes constantly seeking to learn rather than to dominate. "I owe everyone an apology," Jeremy announced to the assembled gym, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. "I let my ego turn this place into a reflection of my own insecurities. I disrespected not just a legend, but the sport itself and every person who walks through these doors seeking something better." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was contemplative. These were people who understood second chances, who knew that boxing taught lessons that extended far beyond the ring. Emily Chen, a 17-year-old with dreams of going professional, stepped forward first. "Then show us every day," she said simply. "That's all any of us can do." Jeremy nodded, and something in his expression suggested he understood exactly what she meant. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was a daily choice, a commitment to being better than you were yesterday. Over the following weeks, the gym's atmosphere underwent a complete transformation. Jeremy began arriving early, not to assert dominance but to help newer members wrap their hands properly. He held mitts for teenagers, offered technical advice with genuine humility, and when asked about his Olympic achievements, he consistently changed the subject to focus on his students' potential. Mike continued his routine, but gradually began opening up to the community that had formed around him. When Emily asked for help with her footwork, he spent 30 minutes showing her subtle adjustments that immediately improved her technique. When Alex struggled with controlling his aggression, Mike shared quiet wisdom about the difference between fighting angry and fighting focused. "Boxing isn't about hurting people," Mike told Emily one afternoon as she packed up her gear. "It's about understanding them, learning to read fear, control anger, carry power without using it unless you absolutely must." She listened with the intensity of someone receiving sacred knowledge. "And never confuse strength with cruelty," he continued. "The strongest people are the ones who don't need to prove it." These moments of teaching came naturally, organically, without fanfare or formal structure. Mike had become what he had never intended to be, a mentor, a guide for young fighters seeking something more than technical instruction. Jeremy, meanwhile, was discovering that true leadership meant service rather than dominance. He found deep satisfaction in helping beginners discover their potential, in creating an environment where everyone could grow rather than a hierarchy designed to elevate his own status. 3 months after the fight that changed everything, a charity event was organized to raise money for youth boxing programs throughout the region. The organizers asked Jeremy to participate, and he agreed on one condition, that Mike join him for a demonstration bout. "Not a real fight," Jeremy explained to Mike privately. "Just a few rounds to show people what boxing really looks like when it's done right. Let them see the art, the control, the respect." Mike considered the proposal carefully. He had spent decades avoiding the spotlight, seeking peace and anonymity. But he looked around the gym at the young faces that had come to trust him, at the community that had grown around their shared love of the sport, and he nodded once. "One condition," he said. "We do this to teach, not to entertain." The charity event was held in Millstone Community Center, with folding chairs arranged around a regulation ring. No pyrotechnics, no celebrity announcers, just 2 men demonstrating what boxing could be when practiced with mutual respect and genuine skill. They touched gloves as the bell rang, and what followed was less a fight than a masterclass. Jeremy moved with technical precision, Mike with fluid artistry. They exchanged combinations that showcased timing, distance, and control rather than power. It was boxing as ballet, Violence transformed into beauty. When it ended, both men embraced in the center of the ring. The crowd stood and applauded, but not for a winner. There wasn't one. They applauded for what they had witnessed. Two men who had found their way through conflict to something deeper and more valuable than victory. Months later, as autumn settled over Millstone, Mike stood in the gym watching the evening training session. Jeremy worked quietly with a new student. Emily sparred with controlled intensity, and Alex focused on the heavy bag with newfound discipline. The gym hummed with purposeful energy, with learning, with growth. For the first time in years, Mike felt something he had almost forgotten existed: peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. The storm that had raged inside him for so long had finally found its calm center. Sometimes the greatest victories don't end with someone falling down. Sometimes they end with everyone standing taller. The legend of Iron Mike Tyson had many chapters, but perhaps none more important than this quiet one. The chapter where he learned that true strength wasn't about how hard you could hit, but how deeply you could heal.